So, Miller's Girl. It's a fairly new movie. It came out in 2024. To be honest, I did not hear pretty much anything about the movie when it first came out because first of all, I wasn't the target audience, and the only way I found out was via clips, maybe? I don't know if I saw a clip or if I just searched for it, searched for like their performances, and that this came up. And honestly, the main selling factor for me for this movie was the fact that it was Jonah Ortega and Martin Freeman. That was pretty much the only reason why I watched it. I just saw that that's such an odd combination that I had to watch it. Then I watched the trailer, and I realized that it's a student teacher relationship, and I was intrigued, but not in a necessarily good way. I was very much side eyeing the whole concept, but I was like, okay, it's two really good actors. I really like both of them, so I want to watch it because it's an odd combo. To put it simply, the movie is about a girl named Cairo. She starts a class with a. He's not a new teacher, but she's new to his class, so for some reason. I guess she just didn't take a literature class for the whole of her high school. And so she meets Mr. Miller, played by Martin Freeman, and that's where it starts. I mean, they start to flirt. It's very, very awkward at the beginning, but I'll get to that later. They have a thing going on. It all kind of goes wrong in the end, and the end of the movie is somewhat satisfying. I think it was okay. In a very short review, it was okay. It was decent. If you don't like student teacher kind of taboo relationships, you're not gonna enjoy this. The characters are not necessarily likable, but overall, I think it was a decent movie. It had actually pretty good taste in music. I really enjoyed the music, and it was very pretty to look at. I think the way it was shot was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. And there isn't that many locations, so it's really interesting the way they worked with it to make it look interesting. There was this one really cool shot that I really enjoyed when when Miller was reading the porn that Kyra sent him, and they put like a reflection of Kyra into his eye to symbolize that he's thinking of her. And I think as much as it was kind of a cliche shot, I don't think it was a oh my god, like that was like a revolutionary type of shot, but it was really well done. It kind of was like, ooh, like I noticed it. I was like, okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. I like that one. Kyra in this movie is still in high school. That really pissed me off because I was hoping she was at least in college. And she was supposed to be 18, which is fine. Makes it not much better, honestly. Like, at least she's 18, but I don't understand why they couldn't make it a college level. I feel like that would be kind of cool. But at the same time, considering who Miller as a character is, it kind of makes sense that he never made it to college level teaching, that he only made it to high school teaching. Like, it makes sense. The characters make sense, but it doesn't make it good. I don't feel like the movie really justifies their action, in my opinion. So at least there's that. But when I first watched the trailer, I thought she was going to be in college, and that's not the case. So watch out for that. The best part about the movie, in my opinion, were the performances. I think they were actually really good. But basically, Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega have a very different acting style. But somewhat it ended up working out. I'm no expert in acting, so I don't know the terms. I don't know anything of that sort. I don't know anything about acting whatsoever. I can just kind of look at it and be like, yeah, I can appreciate this type of acting, or I can see that they do this and that. But I'm not an actor or anything like that. However, as I said, I think Martin Freeman has much more of a real life acting, while Jenna Ortega, in my opinion, has more theatrical acting. And at first, I thought it was clashing. At first, thought it was not gonna work. I was a bit like, okay, weird combo, but let's go. But in the end, it did end up working out. It was pretty good, and I enjoyed their performances. I didn't like the characters, but I enjoyed enjoyed the actors in these roles. I think they brought everything they could, and it came out pretty good. There was like one scene that I will talk about later as well that really sold me on this film, and that was where I kind of changed my perspective, because up until that point it was just awful. So the main difference between their acting styles, right? So you have Martin Freeman, who in my opinion has a very laid back, true to life acting style. By this I mean that he does little gestures, he like does all these little things that bring the character to life. I don't know, like he licks the corner of his mouth, or he uses his hands more in the scenes. Like the way he moves like the character, and it's really convincing. I really enjoy this type of acting. The only downside is that I feel like it becomes very repetitive. I haven't seen Martin Freeman done any other type of acting except this one so far, from the things that I've seen him in. And oftentimes he doesn't really do that much of a range when it comes to his characters. However, the acting style he has is just so good that I don't really mind it. I love him and everything. So then Jenna Ortega, on the other hand, she has much more dramatic take on acting. As I said, I would call it more theatrical. That's why she also very much fits into those like gothic, mysterious types of works. It just works because she has that kind of face, that kind of acting, that kind of gestures, the way she moves. It's very obvious acting. I don't think this is like a groundbreaking revelation or anything. Considering the roles that she chooses, it very much makes sense that this is the way she acts. I think she does it really well. And like, yeah, I mean, surprisingly, it really mashed together somehow. I did not expect that, but the second half of the movie was done really well. So, first of all, the relationship. I could not stand it. I couldn't. I shielded my eyes, covered my ears, stopped the movie after every other sentence because I had to digest every other word in what was happening. I found it way too cringe. I was not enjoying it. This is like the first half of the film where they're flirting, he turns out that he has a wife, which I didn't know going into this movie, so of course it has to be a cheating incident because why wouldn't it? And the way he interacts with his wife, the way he interacts with his friends, the way Cairo and Miller interact with each other, I found it so awkward because I knew what was coming, and I had a very hard time getting through the first half of the film. There was a scene at the beginning which I wouldn't find that bad if I didn't know what was going on. So they had the first meet, like at the beginning of the year, where Cairo comes to his class. First of all, she comes way too early because she says that she doesn't like crowds, but like, girl, the crowds are gonna be there anyway, so I don't know what you're talking about, but okay, you do you. So in this scene, Cairo and her friend Winnie, they leave to go, get lunch. No, sorry, breakfast. And Miller's fellow teacher, friend, coach, comes in. So Miller first picks up a book that Cairo is reading, which turns out to be basically porn, old-fashioned porn, and the coach then picks it up and starts mocking it. And the one thing I appreciate, again, Martin's acting in this really shines. He kind of takes time to try and make the pile of books look like he didn't touch it, which I feel like a lot of films don't do this. So I really appreciated that gesture. But yeah, the whole scene, it was weird. It would be fine if I didn't know what was going on, but because I knew what was going on, I was like, please, stop torturing me. After that, I presume later on in the day, Miller is with his fucking wife. His wife, which I didn't know he had before I went into this film. So I didn't know this was going to be a cheating movie, but apparently it is, so, good for me. His wife is a bitch. She has no respect for her husband, which, fine, whatever, you do you. But why is she with him? Why the fuck would she be with him in the first place if she has absolutely no respect for him? I'm not saying that she has to, like, he is a little bitch, but why are you in a relationship like that? You have money. It's not like she has to rely on him in any way. She most likely has more money than he does. And yeah, okay, there's the whole divorce thing where you would have to separate assets, but it's like, if you don't love your husband anymore, why would you torture yourself with being in a relationship like that? Anyway, so as a result, she was just being unnecessarily rude. It was like she was being truthful, but this is not the way you talk to your partner. Like, I personally find that truth is important, but it's important the way you deliver it. And obviously, the way she was delivering it, it wasn't landing, and it was just hurting Miller. So that's just not gonna be good for the relationship. Then it definitely drove him away. The coach was a pervert just as much as Miller. Him knowing where the so-called line was did not make it any better. I think he was just as bad. He just never got caught and he knew how to cover his tracks. I didn't like him. Then Winnie was the best friend of Cairo. I didn't like her. She was really annoying. I was not enjoying her character at all. But if there was one victim in the whole movie, it would be Winnie, because the way Cairo acted towards her was just unacceptable. Like, she was obviously very much taking advantage of the crush that Winnie had on her, and that is just like, okay, well, like that sucks. She was lesbian, but she was flirting with the coach heavily. It felt a bit weird, but I don't know. I guess she was bi. I didn't really care, honestly. Like, you do you. I moved on from that really quickly. For our main characters, so we have the Miller dude. He was a bitch who had absolutely no backbone. It was said in the movie, but he really liked the way Kyra was massaging his ego, reading his book, whatever. And, that's probably why he was attracted to her in the first place. Like, yeah, okay, she's pretty, but he's like, oh, look at this girl who appreciates my work. So, I don't like him. I thought for a second he was the villain of the movie because there was like a moment that I was like, yeah, you're the villain. But at the same time, I feel like all of them were bitches. Like, it was his fault, the whole situation, but they were all bitches. I did not like any of them. And then there's Cairo, our actual main character, basically. I do think that in a way, both Miller and Cairo are very much same level of main character because they are both given pretty much the same amount of effort to like introduce them, show their background and whatnot. Like, yeah, okay, Miller is the bigger bad here, but realistically, I feel like both of them are kind of main characters. But with Cairo, um, I don't really know what to think of her. On one hand, she is a victim, but in the end, the show kind of does this thing, like this cliche thing, where it turns out that it was all her scheme to write good essay. I don't know. I was like, okay, I can believe that. She seemed to be the kind of character that would do something like that, but I don't know. Like, I don't really know what to think of her because she was okay. I didn't like her just like the rest of the characters, but she basically did the whole thing just for the plot. So, yeah. I started to actually somewhat enjoy the film about halfway through. It was after Mr. Watson read the porn Kyra wrote of him and her, and I mean he jerked off to it, which was really bad. And I didn't want to see Martin Freeman and like that, but and that's what they brought, and it was fine. But this is the funny thing, actually. There are no sex scenes in this movie. They suggest things. There are suggestive things. There are touching things, but realistically, when I look at the story, Miller and Cairo kissed once in the movie. Otherwise, they basically haven't touched each other. The only sex scene they had was basically in the fantasy. So the porn that Kyra wrote, like they showed us some scenes from it, but realistically they didn't do anything. Miller barely touched Kyra, even in the fantasies. I find that actually kind of interesting, and I do think it was a pretty good choice, because just because they haven't done anything sexual doesn't mean that it's not bad. It's still a pretty bad situation, and the fantasy alone showed how intimate their relationship was when it shouldn't have been. So I really appreciate that. And it's kind of funny also to see that Miller touched and was much more sexual on screen with his wife, which the actors are much more closer to age, so they were probably more uncomfortable with that behind the scenes as well. And from a like behind the scenes technical aspect, I think it was really well done, because realistically Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega, as I said, they did not touch each other. They had one kiss, and even that was very PG, and so it was really interesting choice. They still managed to make it really intimate despite that. My favorite part of the film comes here. It's really I don't know if this should be really my favorite part of the film, but basically, after the jerk off, Miller got the biggest post-nat clarity that he ever gotten, and he decided to break it off with Kyra the next day at school. This is the scene that I thought was really, really cool. It's probably the best scene in the whole movie, in my opinion. I really was like, woo! I was hooked. Because of the performances. I don't know about the script. The script could have been a little better. I don't know. There were some parts that I was like, I think Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega really, really did a fucking amazing job in this scene. I had to rewatch it. After I watched the scene, I rewatched it. That was the only scene that I did that with, because I was like, whoa. Yeah, so up until this point was when I thought that the acting styles of Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega clashed a little bit in some of the scenes. Like I think it was okay, but it was obvious that they were like very different actors. But in that scene, they blended so well together. Like it created this amazing, cool scene. I was flabbergasted. Basically, what happens? Miller comes in and he blames her for the illusion of a relationship. Like he's just like, oh, this is all your fault. This is all in your head, and leave me out of this. He's blaming her for creating a certain fantasy about them, and claims they are only student and teacher to each other. He even calls her a child at some point during the conversation, because after the post-nat clarity, he realized that's what she is. She rightfully calls him out on all the BS that he said in the moment. Says that he was in it just as much as she was, which is true. Like I feel like he was just as much flirting with her as she was with him. Like there's no denying that. During this part, I cannot help it. This is where I think I found it a bit annoying. The script was a little bit like Tumblr Deep TM-esque at some points, but again, the performances carried the scene, so I'm not complaining too much. There's a moment where he officially tells her that he's done with her, and what happens is that they linger the camera a little bit too long on Martin Freeman's face and then on Jenna Ortega's face. I think it was a cool idea, because both of them are really good at acting emotion even without saying anything, but I do think it went on just a little too long. Just a little too long. Just a little. But it was fine. After that, Jenna goes on to have a speech where she calls him weak or something, like just tells him that he's a little bitch, and I agree. And again, it had that deep TM style type of writing, and I cringed a little bit, but it was fine. I think they tried a little too hard. I feel like I would enjoy the scene a little bit more if there was slightly more build up to it, because I wouldn't say that it came out of nowhere. I do think it was a good progression to that scene, but considering how dramatic the speech was, I wish the scenes before that were slightly more dramatic as well. There is this kind of a cool moment that Martin Freeman does in his, like, again, acting as she's walking towards him. He walks back and he, like, stretches out his hand, keep her at distance, and I don't know, I think that was a really cool thing. And also Jenna Ortega, she at one point lifts his chin towards her, like she's talking to him, right? Those are the two gestures that I really appreciate in the scene, because I just thought it really added something. Despite it not being clear on camera, I didn't care because it was there and it added to the tension. The speech was still a little bit too deep TM, but you know, I can look past it. The problem I had with the speech was, if I were Miller in that scene, I would zone out. I would check out, because to me, this is probably where the more tension before this scene would be helpful, because to me it just felt like a tantrum. It felt like Cairo was throwing a tantrum because this guy broke up with her. So I couldn't take her speech completely seriously, as much as she was right. She was completely in right. She said nothing but truth. But I was just like, okay, this girl having a tantrum, you know, that's what it felt like to me. She then leaves, and this is the point where the story goes from a disturbing forbidden love story to what would most likely happen in real life. And this is why also I think this scene is really good, because as much as it kind of pretends that this movie is a love story, and in a way it is, the ending and the second half of the movie is very much not romanticized. It is very much kind of like, oh, this is what would most likely happen. So, like, you know, she takes on revenge, she does stupid shit and whatnot, you know, she's a low-key psychopath, but so is Miller. So Kyra then goes on to have a revenge arc. She decides to submit this story that she wrote to the principal, which obviously brings attention to their whole situation and makes it look bad. Miller is being investigated by the principal, and he doesn't do a good job at looking innocent. Like, he looks incredibly guilty, and he gets suspended. He does end up having a talk with his friend coach, and the coach just turns out to be just as bad as him, because he has been flirting with Winnie a lot throughout the film, but then he decides that, oh, this is the line, I shouldn't cross it. And he tells him that. He tells Miller that he knows where the line is, and so that's why it's okay, basically. Here, Cairo used Winnie's crush on her to force her into sending a picture of them kissing in their bras to the coach. And it's something that obviously makes Winnie a little bit uncomfortable, but she wants to do it because she has a crush on Cairo or whatever. And this is where Cairo, in my opinion, has her own villain arc, because poor Winnie, as much as I didn't like her, I was like, oh, you don't deserve this girl. But whatever. And so then they go through like a whole process. Miller ends up having a fight with his wife. They divorce. He loses his job, I think. And the movie ends with them being at a courthouse. He says a soft hi, she smiles, and that's the end. I do think that the characters are done well. I fully believed that the two teachers could be someone who would start dating a student. Not just because of the flirting, but also because throughout the whole film, they very much blurred the lines between being authority and being friends with the students. They were smoking together, they even shared a fucking cigarette, they were swearing in front of them. When Coach came into Miller's classroom, Winnie was sitting on the fucking table, on the fucking teacher's table, and he did not say anything about that. So I think that the two teachers very much fit a description of someone having an affair with a student, or, you know, flirting or whatever, like just blurring the lines and not taking responsibility for the fact that they're being weird and creepy. Kyra's arc somewhat makes sense, except the end. I was like, okay, whatever, it's your choice. Wife made sense, like the way she was acting towards him was very obvious why. I think Miller was the type of person that if it was played by someone else, it would be creepy as fuck. But because it was played by Martin Freeman, who's very much lovable type of character, I think he really brought the fake innocence to him. Like someone who is a villain but doesn't seem so. I think this was a pretty good casting. I wouldn't expect that. For Cairo to end up being the mastermind behind it all was a bit cliche for me. It wasn't exactly baseless. You know, teenage girls do like to be dramatic as fuck, and I fully believe that because she had nothing going on in her life to inspire her work, she would cause a huge drama to get her going. But like, girl, I don't know if you're getting into Yale. Yeah, so as much as it was not a completely satisfying ending. I think it was just okay, but it made sense. Like the way the girls were acting, I was like, yeah, I can see this. When I remember me as a teenager in high school, I can very much see this happening. Like, there were a couple of girls in my class that I can see them causing drama just because they had nothing going on in their life. I mean, to be fair, like, Kyra obviously had issues with her parents, so I don't know, she could have found some trauma inspiration in there, but I guess she chose not to, so whatever. I do want to talk about the conversation about sex between Cairo and Winnie. It very much felt like it was written by an adult who doesn't remember what teenagers are like. Teenagers are sexual. I agree with that. I understand why they portray them sexual, because realistically, I do think that teenagers, especially at the age of like 16 to 18, they do be quite sexual even if they're still virgins. I don't think showing this part of teenage life is wrong. I don't like the way they go about it because it really isn't as smooth and sexy as they make it seem. It's very awkward because most 16 to 18-year-olds are still virgins, unless you're, in an orgy school or whatever. And there's no way you can be smooth about sex before you had it, in my opinion. It's just not possible. You're always going to be a little bit awkward. So the way Kyra and Winnie talked about sex, I find it really hard to believe that they would really talk like that. I find that the way teenagers talk about sex in movies is the way people that already had sex talk about it. So, like, I don't get it. And I'm tired of shows and movies doing this. They uttered something along the lines of, oh, it shouldn't hurt the first time. You don't even bleed that much. Like, bruh, bullshit. Like, okay, I'm sure there's a lot of girls that don't feel a thing or don't bleed at all or have absolutely no problem, but like, let's be real here for a second and don't claim that it cannot be like that. First time can be beautiful. I'm pretty sure about that can happen, but it's awkward. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be painful. Stop lying. The main thing about this movie that did not let it be better than it was the fact the movie told you everything. They did not let you come to the conclusions yourself. Everything was spelled out for you. There were a couple of things like, oh, I know where the line is and I won't cross it, or you're the villain, etc. Like, there's just scenes where they tell you what the movie is about. I found that frustrating and patronizing because I came to those conclusions before they told me. For example, with the villain scene, right? I was like, oh, I literally thought, okay, so Miller is the villain. Like, he really is. He really is a little bitch and a villain. And then the movie goes on to tell you that he's the villain. And I'm like, okay, well, what did I put my effort into? Why am I even thinking when you tell me everything? But to give them the benefit of the doubt, I do understand why they did this. As much as I don't like it, as much as I disagree with it, I understand why they would do that, considering the subject of the film. There is no room for actual romanticization of such a relationship. Like, in a way, there's still, you could still romanticize it if you want, but I don't think the movie has done such a job to be like, oh my god, this is like so hot to be in a student-teacher, huge age gap type of relationship. Like, I don't think that's exactly what they've done. I would also say that this movie is not deep. It doesn't have a point. It doesn't have a conversation. I think it's just a story. It's a story that, it may try to question societal conventions and examine love or whatever it may claim to be doing, but realistically, I feel like it was just a disturbing, tragic love story. I don't know exactly what I would call it, but it was just a story where everyone is low-key a villain, but still just a story. I don't think it's bad that it didn't have a deep point. I enjoy that kind of writing. I enjoy those kinds of movies because it's more of exploration of what could happen in real life. So I don't think it needs to have a deep point. And, if anyone tells you otherwise, they may see some kind of conversation starter in there, but I don't, and I think that's okay. There were two arguments that I saw online. So I saw, when I was browsing comment sections, I saw these two arguments. One was talking about how Miller's wife is an older version of Kyra, and I actually completely agree with that. Not only they look quite similar, but they have very much the same vision. Like, she's an already established writer who's writing a book, and Kyra is someone who wants to become a writer, and she's just starting, and she's looking for inspiration. And if Miller and Kyra would end up in a relationship, I can definitely see Kyra going down the path where she stops respecting Miller and becomes an alcoholic and unhappy in the relationship and whatnot. Like, I very much agree with this theory. And the second argument was that Kyra and Miller end up together after the film ends. I can see that happening, especially with the affection that they still had at the end of the film. After all that's done, both of them actually got writing motivation out of this relationship, so I can actually see them going back into this. No matter how toxic it may be, no matter how wrong it may be, I can see them going back into it just for inspiration. And the other thing is, apparently, people were hating on Jenna for this film, because she's a child actress, but I'm like, no, she's not. Okay, okay, she was in Wednesday, she was in Beetlejuice, but like she's not a child actress. Like look at it, look at the roles she chooses. Like okay, she started as a child actress, but I feel like she surpassed that image quite some time ago. I don't know what the fuck are people on about, but you know. So yeah, overall, I think it was an okay movie. If you cannot stand student-teacher relationships, I wouldn't recommend this movie. But honestly, it's not that bad. Like, if you have a spare hour, it's not that long. I think it's hour and a half movie. Like, if you have that time and you have nothing else to watch, I would say watch this because I genuinely would not think of putting Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega in a movie together. Like, this is a fucking ass combination. Like, I would never thought of that. And it's a romance between them too. But yeah, I mean, it was decent. As I said before, I don't think I would watch it again unless a friend would want to watch it. I do think it will be quite a forgettable movie. It will be the kind of thing that I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, it was okay.